Hi, hi. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak today. I appreciate the organizers for accommodating me because I was supposed to speak yesterday, but I was in Ottawa at the Slugfest, commonly referred to the Assembly of First Nations annual assembly, when it took them most of the day to approve the agenda and then another 1 hour to approve another resolution, and they had 78 resolutions. So you can imagine what was going on there. I think people need a lot of help getting themselves organized. So I was hoping that somebody could give me a mic stand because I want to show you something before I get into the discussion that I wanted to get into today. So I don't know how that's going to work out. Oh yeah, if you hang on to the mic for me, that'd be great. Thank you. Oh, sorry. So what I wanted to start with is that water is life. That's your title of your conference today, and talk about our own laws in relation to water. And I'm talking about the ceremonies that women do for water.
Just a moment.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Is that going to work?
We just gotta have it hold still.
Oh, perfect. Can you hear me? Okay.
You want me to turn up the volume a little bit?
Okay, maybe that'd be good. So we've always had these ceremonies, even before these people had a thought across the big water that they wanted to come over here. We had these ceremonies, and I want to tell you about this ceremony, not the whole ceremony because we'd be here for the rest of the day. And they said I had an hour, so I'll do what I can for an hour. So when we do these ceremonies, these are really ancient. This is an ancient ceremony. We start out by offering to the space water, to the water that's in space, that travels in space. So I have a flag here. It's got stars and the moons and planets on this flag. And only recently, I think within the last 3 years or something, the non-Indigenous peoples came to the realization that there's space water. And I remember reading the article and I thought, you finally caught up to us. But anyway, so we've always had when we do our water ceremonies, we always start with the water that came from space. So we always recognize that water that comes from space. So that's a flag for that. And then we have the next one is the water that comes down in the form of snow or rain or sleet or hail. So we have a flag for that. And each one of these waters have their own name and their own characteristics that you have to acknowledge in the ceremony. So we have a cloth for that one. Then we have a cloth for the water that's sitting under the ground. There's underground rivers, and the rivers that flow above, the streams. These are waters that are flowing. And I remember one time I was talking to an old person, and he was telling me, I was telling him I was going to Ireland. And he said to me, he says, when you go over there, he said, look for these streams that are coming out of the sides of the hills. And he said, you'll see flowers on the side of these, beside these streams. He said, these flowers, they're there that signal the little people. And he said, those little people travel underground rivers, and they come over here. He said, so you have to put down tobacco for them. And so I did, and then I ran out of tobacco, so I had to go buy some more tobaccos. There were so many of these little people in the streams, and that were all over the place. And so we have to acknowledge the waters that go under the ground, and we have to acknowledge the waters that are flowing above the ground. Then we have to acknowledge the snow on the mountains and the glaciers, because those are the ones that, for the most big rivers that are flowing across Turtle Island, they come from the mountains and they come from the glacier waters. So in the northern part, from the frozen waters that are sea ice and sea water. That's what this one's for. We acknowledge them. And then we have flags for these, where, you know, in the swamp waters, that they have all the life, all the different things, the frogs, all the animals that live in this what they call swamp water. They clean the water. They have those bulrushes in there that clean the water, so that those are a separate kind of water. That's this one. And this one here, this water here, is for the water that kind of, you know, like when it rains, you have these puddles of water, and there's puddles in the water, and there's like areas of water where the water falls, and then that's where all these little animals that need to have water, this is where they are, and you have to acknowledge them. And the most important one, and the last one, is the woman. The woman carries a child inside of her for 9 months in water. How come we don't drown? That water that's there, when the woman breaks, when the water breaks and the child is born, and the child comes to here, Turtle Island, that water has a special name. And that water we have to acknowledge, because the old people tied the treaties directly to this water. When they say we made the treaties for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows and the waters flow, not the rivers flow, but the waters flow. The old people linked the women directly to the water, to the treaty, because treaty is life, like water is life. And we have to do these ceremonies, because if we don't do these ceremonies, the water is drying up, because we're not taking care of it. This is not the Muniao, the non-Indigenous people's responsibility. This is our responsibility. This is our responsibility to take care of the water, because we always used to take care of the water. Now our young people don't know these ceremonies. They don't know how to do that. They don't even know where to do them. So we have to do that. So you talk about, water is life, but how do we make sure the life continues? So instead of switching over constantly to talking about the non-Indigenous way of doing things, let's start with the way Indigenous peoples do things. Then we can talk about the other people. So I'll just say that for what it's worth. So today I wanted to talk about, first of all, the doctrine of discovery. This doctrine of discovery was done in 1493. Well, the concept was encoded within this papal bull of 1493. That's the first papal bull. Well, there was other papal bulls, but nothing related to us. But it said they gave the Spanish king, who happened to be the relative of the Pope who signed the document, and is actually drafted by the Spanish lawyers, so you have to be careful about lawyers in general. Me being one, I can talk about that. Anyway, the Spanish lawyers drafted this for the Pope to sign, basically dividing up the world into those who are Christianized and those who are not Christianized, and saying that all the non-Christianized areas of the lands they come across, they can say that they own that land. And then they further went along and said in 1537 that the Catholic Church, papal bull, said that they are allowed to kill us, because in our death we would be saved. Those two papal bulls still exist today. So when you go, like, so when there's a guy named Stephen Newcomb. He's a Shawnee, and he's always been on these papal bulls and talking about these papal bulls, and he said he's going to go to Rome and see the papal bulls, and many meetings I was at, he was talking about that. So one day I was at a meeting, I can't remember where I was. I think it was in California or somewhere. And he started going on about the papal bulls. And I said, the last time we seen you, you said you were going to Rome to see these papal bulls. Like, why are you still talking about it? He said, because I didn't see them. We didn't see them. He went with Virgil Killstraight. They didn't see them. I said, well, why didn't you see them? He said, because they're not in Rome. I said, oh, well, where are they? I didn't know. And he said they're in Seville, Spain, in the archives of the Indians. There's a big archives in Seville. I think it has something like 1.6 kilometers of documents in Seville that's about Indians of the Americas. And so I was kind of annoyed with Steve, to tell you the truth, because we'd been talking about it for ages. I said, well, why didn't you go see it? He said, well, I got to get around to it. And I said, okay, here's the deal. Let's go see the papal bulls. We'll organize, we'll go see the papal bulls. So Deborah Harry, who's a Northern Paiute, and myself, her and I went with Steve. We went to Seville. And we went to the archives of the Indians. And they wouldn't let us see them. It took 4 days of us patiently going back every day. They had a new argument why we couldn't see them. And on the third day, we went to them and we said, just tell us one name of one person, an Indian from the Americas, who's actually seen these documents, and then we'll go away, because we don't believe they exist. That was our final argument. So we went they said, come back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. This is the fourth day now. So we came back at 10 o'clock the next morning, and they brought us into an office inside the director of the Archives of the Indians, which I should tell you, this building used to be used by the Spanish to sell Indians that they enslaved from Central and South America. They brought them across, and they used to sell them from this building. Anyway, now it's called the Archives of the Indians. Anyway, they brought us into this office, which was the director of the archives. And they had this big table, like a big table, but in the middle of the table was a portfolio about this big, like this big. And he opened it up. And we figured that they wouldn't allow us to take pictures. We were pretty sure they wouldn't allow us to take pictures. So I had a camera. And I was like, getting the camera out and fixing the camera, and the guy's going, no picture. But in the meantime, Deborah Harry had an iPhone in her sleeve, like this, and so she's like this, and I'm arguing with him, saying, well, just one picture. Let me take one picture. And he goes, no pictures. In the meantime, Deborah's like this. Anyway. We got pictures of the documents, but this document is still a legal document for Spain. It's still a legal document, both of them, because we saw both of them. And the reason it's a legal document is because the United States and South and Central American countries base their legitimacy on the concept of the doctrine of discovery that these two papal bulls gave to Spain the authority to say they owned our lands and resources. That's what that papal bull meant. It's different in the northern part of Turtle Island. Why is it different? Because we have the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And the Royal Proclamation of 1763 says three things. One, that none of the the crown subjects could come into our territory without an agreement, which is a treaty. The second thing is if they were in our territory without a treaty, the crown had an obligation to remove them. And the third thing, and the more important thing, is that if an agreement could be made only if the Indians so desired. Which means that the British government, the British crown, never asserted the doctrine of discovery in our territory. It's a very important thing to know. Who is asserting the doctrine of discovery in our territory? Canada. And we didn't make treaty with Canada. So you have to be very clear about who you're talking about when you're talking about these issues, because these are very important legal issues. In 1972, in the Western Sahara case, the International Court of Justice said that the doctrine of discovery, terra nullius, and conquest were not valid international legal concepts. That was in the Western Sahara case. That's the international binding law on all people who are part of the states who are part of the United Nations. So that's what it is in Canada. But what Canada is trying to do, and they're trying to convince us that they own our land. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to convince us. Some of our people are sort of falling for the trap. You have to be careful. So in 2012, at the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is a United Nations committee, we were appearing before the committee about things that Harper was doing. Remember Harper? I call him Helmet Head, but anyway. He was trying to do some terrible things to us. You know, those omnibus bills and all this sort of stuff. And so we filed a complaint at the CERD, which is what they call an urgent action. And anyway, Canada was having to appear and answer questions. But one of the things the members of CERD asked Canada to do was to produce a document or documents that shows that they own the territories and lands of the Indigenous nations which are presently within the state of Canada. 2012. 2022, no such document has ever been produced by Canada to the international community. None. Why? Because none exists. So there is no doctrine of discovery in this country. We have to remember that. Because if we don't remember that, we're going to lose our international status. Now, what they've done is different. You have to remember the legal history of what the United States did. Look at how the United States was created. The United States rebelled against Great Britain and sort of said they decolonized themselves from Great Britain. But international law does not recognize that because they were the colonizers. The white people in the United States colonized America. They did, and they do not have the right to decolonize in international law. So the United States is not really a legal government in international law. I said that at an American Bar Association meeting in Chicago, and I barely made it out of the room alive. All these lawyers, lawyers like rednecks from who knows where, and everybody else were saying, "Oh, how can you say that about the United States?" Because it's true. You don't like to hear the truth, but that's the truth. And a lawyer from Nigeria got up and said that I was right. Then they attacked him. But anyway, but I think as treaty peoples and from our territories, we have to remember who we are and what we're doing here. Because this is what propelled us to the United Nations to begin with in 1977, was to have the United Nations see that we are nations like all other nations. Not that we weren't asking them. We never asked the United Nations to say we are nations. We said we are nations and we have rights as nations. And what happened was that the United Nations began drafting a Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 1984, 85. And I know because I was there. I was involved in all the negotiations. And what happened was we managed, because the state governments didn't anticipate this. They thought we were like them. It took them from 1947 until 1977 to draft the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, 30 years. They figured that if we started working on a draft declaration itemizing or articulating the rights of Indigenous peoples, that it would take us 30 years, and it would be like a make-work project. They would just keep us busy over here drafting and all this, they'll just do one this year and then next year, to sort of spin it on for 30 years. That's not what happened. The declaration, much to the surprise of the whole bloody world, was drafted basically from 1986 until 1991. Took us 5 years. And how did we manage that? Because Indigenous peoples all over the world have a very clear understanding about their obligations and responsibilities for their creation. They know that. So when it came time to drafting the document, it was easy to do. Because once we reached back into our original instructions, all of us, didn't matter where we came from, once we reached back into those original instructions, didn't matter if you're the Maasai in Tanganyika or the Yanomamis in Brazil or Crees in northern Saskatchewan, wherever people were, we all understood the original instructions. So when we understood the original instructions, it was relatively easy to do. Let me give you an example. I sometimes cite this example because it's kind of an indication of how things happen. So one time, we were in a meeting one time. We used to have these internal meetings of drafting meetings, and it just happened that day I was chairing the meeting. We used to rotate chairs. Some were Spanish-speaking people, some were others. Anyway, I was chairing that day, and on this side of the room, it was a room about half the size of this, but full of people. And the Inuktitut elders were there from the high Arctic. And they wanted in the declaration a provision that protected the sea ice, right? Right? Because you remember the flags, the sea ice? They wanted it in the declaration, sea ice. So this is what's going on. So they're talking in Inuktitut. It was being translated from Inuktitut to English, because English, French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese are the official languages of the UN. So we had the translating booths working for us, but we still needed to translate from Inuktitut into English, and then once it was into English, the rest of it could be interpreted. So on this is the Inuktitut side over here, and on this side is this David Yanomami from the Yanomamis in Brazil. He's sitting there and he's kind of crunching his face up like he's trying to he's trying to figure out what's going on. So anyway, they finished making their presentation about sea ice. And then I turned to David and I said, I think I noticed that you have some questions about what was being presented here. Yes, he did. So, okay, so now this is what happened. From Inuktitut, it went to English, and then it went to Spanish, and then from Spanish into Portuguese, because Portuguese and Spanish may be a closely linked language, but they're still different languages. Then Portuguese is not part of the UN system, language group. And then from Portuguese into Yanomami. Okay, so that's what's going on in the room. So So David said what he had to say in Yanomami, and then it was translated to Portuguese, and then it was translated to Spanish, and then it was translated across the room. And basically what his question was, he didn't understand why you wanted to put something in the declaration which was so important to our people, so fundamental to our people's rights, that they wanted to put something in the document that related to keeping a drink cold. He had never, ever envisioned sea ice. He lived in the jungles in Brazil. He had no concept of this sea ice business. So then I turned back to them, to the Inuktitut elders, and I said to them, would you like to explain to David what the significance of sea ice is to your life? So they did. They went through the whole thing again. And he understood. He said, yes, of course we have to put it in there. Sea ice has, yes, it has to go in. Everybody agreed that it would go in. So a few hours later, we get to trees. So David is making the thing for trees. And you can see what's going on, because over here, these guys are just waiting for him to finish, because then their hands go up. And they say, we don't understand why we have to protect trees in the Declaration, because we don't have trees. So, but that's the level of, discussion that was going on. And so we really worked together all over the, to craft this document. And it was adopted at two levels of the United Nations system. And then the state governments got a hold of it. And what you now have in the product of the Declaration is not our declaration as Indigenous peoples. I know it's going to come as a hell of a shock to most of you. This is a document that was approved by 7 Indigenous peoples in New York, with the state governments adopting it. And there's something very fundamentally wrong with the Declaration, which is Article 46. Because if you read Article 45, it says nothing in this declaration, blah, blah, blah. That's a standard clause in the UN system, by the way. It's the end of the clause. It says nothing, will impair the rights in the future, blah, blah, blah. That's a standard UN drafting clause. But then you look at number 46, which also says nothing in this declaration. So there's 2 nothing in, which is bad drafting, but it's because the state governments in New York wanted to have that clause inserted. But that clause says that the territorial integrity of the state cannot be dismembered. The territorial integrity. That means that in the declaration you have given, if you agree with that declaration, you have given Canada our territory and our resources, because that's the territorial integrity. That's the flaw in the declaration, what they adopted in New York, and which is also part of UNDRIP. You need to know that, because the more you push for this, the more you're saying, yes, our lands and our territories, including waters, no longer belong to us, they belong to the state of Canada. And Canada can make decisions about them. No, they can't, because we still have the obligations to take care of the creation. That's why I'm talking about these ceremonies. That's why it's important for people to understand the ceremonies. This is a woman's ceremony I was talking about. There's men's ceremonies in relation to water. Like in the springtime when the waters are breaking, the ice is breaking, men are supposed to go down to those breaking waters and do a ceremony so that they are not mean to the women. When how the ice breaks and it has all these shards, it's supposed to calm that water down, those shards, so that men are mean to women. But that's a man's ceremony. They have to do that. I taught my son that ceremony, so he has to do that in the springtime when the rivers are breaking or the ice is breaking on the lakes. I don't even have to remind him now. He just phones me up and says, I'm going to go do the ceremony. I said, oh, good, that's good. But we have to remember these ceremonies, because this is our obligation and responsibility. The other side is bringing all kinds of information to the table and distracting us. And we should not be distracted, because look at what's going on around us. Just coming in here this afternoon, I heard people talking about all kinds of issues related to water. But what have we been doing ourselves to protect that water? What have we been doing? And when you answer that question honestly, you've been doing the ceremonies, you know how to do the ceremonies, then you have done what you need to do to protect that water. I just give you an example. There's an elder that she approached me, and she was saying that she had, what do you call that? You know when you have a really hard time walking? arthritis or rheumatism. I'm not sure which one it is, but she was in a wheelchair, and she couldn't do the ceremony anymore. And so she got a hold of me, and she said to me, "Could I come over and see her?" So I went to see her, and she told me that there's a little like down just below where she lived down there was there used to be a slough there, what they call slough, where there's and she liked to hear the frogs in that slough in the morning, and they weren't there anymore because it was drying up because she hadn't been able to get down there to do the ceremonies for some time, and she asked me to start doing the ceremonies for her. So I started doing that for her, and it took about 5 years, and the water came back. So we still do that ceremony because the water is still there, and she said she's really happy because she can hear the frogs in the water now because that's what we have to think about. So it's not a what do you call? I say there's no instant pudding solutions here. It's don't add water, mix or whatever, and have the pudding and then you can eat it. That's not how these things work. And so I just want to tell you 2 other stories before I shut up. The beavers are really important, and so in Europe they more or less did away with all the beavers about 400 years ago, and so the Swiss about 20 years ago realized that they needed to have beavers back in Switzerland. So they brought some beavers from Canada actually to Switzerland and found a place to put them in Switzerland so that they could start naturally doing what beavers do to bring back the ecosystem. And so I was in Geneva one time and had one of the Dene chiefs traveling with me, and so one of the guys that were involved in this beaver project. So I was really excited that there was, Dene chief was there, and they said, "Do you know anything about beavers?" "Oh yeah, he knows lots about beavers." And they said, "Would you like to come and see our beavers? The beaver, where you set them up. There's a house and everything there." I said, "Oh yeah, sure." They said to me, "You want to go?" And I said, "No, I've seen a lot of beaver dams. I don't need to go." Anyway, so the chief, they pick him up in the morning from the hotel and they go over there. And in the evening, we were sitting there having supper, and I said to him, "So how was it?" He says, "It was good. It was really nice." He said, everybody was really friendly to me. They're all talking to me until I was standing there and I was looking and I thought, hey, that's a really fat beaver. That'd make good eating. People stopped talking to me. He said, "I think it might have been something I said." I said, "Maybe just a bit, yeah." But in England, they've reintroduced beavers in Devon, which is in the southwest area of England, because they know that the beavers are needed to help manage the water and the ecosystem and everything. So they reintroduced beavers into this area. And last spring in London, they always have what they call the Chelsea Flower Show. And what they did is they have different things, and this past year was on eco projects to protect the environment. And so the project, the garden that they showed was called Rewilding, and it was the beavers, what the beavers had done in this area, and they actually won first prize in the Chelsea Flower Show, and it became the talk of England that the beavers were being reintroduced, and people are really excited that people see the importance of the beavers. So, we have to treasure them too. Like I always go down to the White Mud Creek when I'm here, and I go down and I bring tobacco and flags for them, and then I put it along the shore, along the bank. So I was doing that, and I was in a ceremony in Ontario, and this woman came in there, and she sat down next to me, and she said, "I'm giving you something." And I said, "Okay, what are you giving me?" And she said, "I'm giving you a beaver pelt, tanned on one side with the hair on the other side." I said, "Oh my God, really? Thank you." And she said, "The beavers told me to gift this to you because you were talking in a good way about them." I said, "Oh wow, okay, thank you." So I have that beaver pelt. But we have to go back to remember our instructions, because everybody talks about all these things that have happened to us, and we focus on the negative rather than on the positive. And we have to see that our responsibilities are not for us alone, but into the future. Because if we don't take care of the water, there will be no future. Because you cannot live without water. Nothing can live without water. Nothing. So if you look at the non-Indigenous world, the World Bank wrote a report. And they said the most valuable commodity on the face of the earth in 2050, which is not that far away, is less than, let me see, I can't, that's why I went to law school, because I wasn't good at math. I think it's like 23 years or 22 years from now. I'll still be a young woman. The most valuable commodity on the face of the earth, this is a World Bank report, is water. Most valuable commodity. More valuable than oil, more valuable than gas, more valuable than gold, more valuable than diamonds. Is going to be drinking water. Because people and everything needs water to survive. So when everybody's running around telling you that, you got to get into this industry or that industry, and how much water they're going to use for that, think about that. Think about that. Because what they're talking about is very short-term for them. For them, it's a short-term profit, but it's a long-term harm. So I always talk about the largest beaver dam in the world, which is northwest of Fort McMurray. And those beavers have been building that dam for more than 40 years, about the same time they started the tar sands extraction. And I've been saying, what did the beavers know that they weren't telling the humans? Because at one time we used to talk to them. And now we're not talking to them. But anyway, they've been constructing the dam. They don't really care what we're doing, because they're taking care of the creation as was their instructions. As was their instructions. So we have to remember that. So when we were drafting the declaration, the original declaration, you should look at the original declaration, not the one that was ultimately approved. But if you look at the original declaration, the language in that document, it doesn't only refer to the humans. It refers to the creation, because that's our responsibility. And they took it out. In New York, it was taken out. And in New York, they took out sea ice. They took it out. Why? Because they want to exploit the Arctic. And they can't exploit it if sea ice is protected. So they took it out. If you look at the document in 2007 that was adopted by the state governments, there's no reference in there to sea ice. So that's what they've done to it. And we have to know that, because otherwise we're going to be building something that's based on a, what do you call that? Shaky foundation. And eventually it'll collapse on top of us. And so we need to really study all these documents. In relation to the papal bulls, I just want to go back to this. In 1989, I bet there's a lot of people in the room that weren't even born in 89, but anyway, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not talking to you. Just turn your ears off. In 1989, we had indigenous peoples from Central and South America who have really been affected by these papal bulls in a major way. And they came to Geneva. There was a huge delegation. And they came to Geneva and they said they wanted to write a letter to the Pope and asking, because in 1992 was 500 years since Columbus. And so they wanted the Catholic Church to rescind those papal bulls as it applied to them. And even though it didn't apply to us, we all agreed that it would, we would support that kind of letter. So there was a letter drafted to the Pope, Your Holiness, whatever title they like to have. Anyway, we wrote the letter to the Pope. And in 1990, we got a letter back from the Vatican. And this is what the Vatican said, that they would not repeal those papal bulls because the Roman Catholic Church was celebrating 500 years of evangelism in the Americas in 1992. Full stop. They have not changed their position since then. So our poor relatives to the south of us, in the other part of our Turtle Island and to the south, they are suffering every day because of what the Catholic Church did and does. And that's why Canada is trying to force us to consider that these doctrine of discovery applies to us, and we have to say no. Because in 1710, 4 men went across the ocean and met with Queen Anne. And in meeting with Queen Anne, she agreed that they would not come into our territory without an agreement. She agreed. It was reconfirmed in 1742 at King George II, when there was 9 men that went over there and 1 woman. So I gotta remember the 1 woman that went with them. There was 9 men and 1 woman went over there, met with King George II for a number of months. They were not there just kind of like drop in, see the, or what would you see in 1742 would be, oh yeah, Westminster was there at that time. Anyway, they didn't drop in for tourism. King George II said to them that he confirms that the treatment of the people of nations that live, tribes and nations that live in British America, which was still then British America, would not be interfered with by his subjects, and that there would be agreements made with them to live in peace and friendship with them. That's what they confirmed in 1742, and then subsequent to that, in 1763, the Royal Proclamation was actually proclaimed and issued to all of the subjects of the king or the crown. So this is not a short history. This is a long history of us advocating. They didn't come out of this idea about how to make this happen. Our people went there. Our people went there and said, you're not coming into our territories. This is our territories. This is not your territories. And they got the king or the queen and then the king, 2 kings to agree to that. And so we have a long history of treaty making with the crown, which we can never forget. Because when we forget that, we'll slide into other things, like thinking that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples passed in New York is a good document, or that UNDRIP is a good document.
1 minute.
So, okay, so I have to shut up now. Thanks for inviting me. That was fast.
I think I can speak for everybody saying that I could listen to you for hours and hours speaking, but definitely. So we will open up the floor for a few questions. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. For Sharon? Yes, come forward, Alvin.
Good afternoon, Sharon. I just wanted to ask a question regarding the sovereignty bill. Like, I know that our treaties, they trump provincial, federal laws and all that stuff. But we're dealing, when we're talking about dealing with the crown. When I was in England, they told me that the crown, there's many layers to it, you have the provincial, federal, the Governor General, the royal family, the corporate, the imperial crown, and also enterprise. And they all interface with one another. So when us treaty Indians, when we're talking about our treaty rights and we're dealing with the crown, who exactly are going to be dealing with in respect to this this sovereignty bill? So that's question number one. Question number two, since you're a member of Muskwa, I was kind of curious to know what's the legal status of Mary Ellen Trupel-Lafon?
Okay, on the sovereignty bill, there's already been a letter drafted to King Charles III about that and the responsibility of the Crown in relation to our treaty. So that letter has already gone out, because if you look at the bill, it says that this legislation is binding on the Crown, which is a contravention of British constitutional law, and in Canada is a constitutional monarchy. So that's a legal question that's already been raised with King Charles III. In relation to Muskeg Lake, I was a member of Muskeg Lake. I'm now a member of the Kainai. But in relation to her, from talking to my relatives, they said that they thought that she was transferring from another band into Muskeg at the time. And so they thought she was part of a band in Manitoba, which they now are finding out that that wasn't the case, so they're looking at that again. So it's kind of an outstanding issue, kind of a touchy issue, because she's been going around for a number of years saying that she was a member of Treaty Indian from Muskeg. But that's another issue. So something is going to happen, but I'm not sure what. What about Daniel Smith being a Cherokee?
I think she should win the laughing contest. That's what she was saying. Does anybody else have any other questions for Sharon? Yes, please come forward.
Hello, thank you for all your hard work in the past and for being here. Very honored to be here. My question, I guess I always wonder, I work in consultation for my First Nation, so dealing with provincial government, I've heard from the elders that we actually fall under the law of the land. So with that being said, like everything that's happening coming forth is actually illegal. So from a legal standpoint, then how can we assert that we come from the law of the land and use that to strengthen our treaties and how we move forward to protect Mother Earth?
Well, the first thing you have to do is stop using the word consultation. We're treaty people, so we have a right to free, prior, and informed consent. That means that as soon as they have an idea in their head that they want to do something, they have to tell us, and they have to give us as much information as they can possibly give us. And I think people say it's a veto. It's not a veto. It's free, prior, and informed consent. That if the people say they want something moved or done, then that's what needs to happen. Let me give you an example of this working. In the Northwest Territories, there was a person wanted to build a cabin on the land, and he came to the nation and said, "I want to build this cabin." And they said, "Where?" And he told them where, and they said, "No, you can't build it there, because we have a graveyard close by, and we don't want you to put it there. But if you want to put a cabin up, we can tell you where you could do that." And he said, okay, let me see where you want to. He said I could build it. He said he didn't want to build it there. And they said, well, okay, then you don't build it. Because if you try to build where you think you're going to build, we'll burn it to the ground. So it has to be that we have a right to say what goes on in the territory. Because if you look at what Alberta's doing, when we made treaty in 1876 or 1877 or even 1899 in Alberta, in what is now considered Alberta, the treaty commissioner never told our old people that they were going to create another entity and put it inside of our territory. They never said that. They never told us they were going to create a province. For me, the creation of Alberta is a violation of our treaty. And so now what they're trying to do is they're trying to say they own the lands and territories. But how can an entity that was not even considered at the time of the treaty making have any rights in our treaty territories? That's my question. It's a legal question as far as I'm concerned. But that's my question. We're getting a huge blowback from the quote-unquote non-Indigenous peoples about the chief's position against Bill 1. There's some really negative stuff out there. Saying that we're slaves of the government of Canada, that we should learn to live in the 21st century. But you know what that tells me? That tells me the failure of the system, education system of the province. They never told those people that are living in our territory that this is why they live in our territory, that there's a treaty there that allows them to live here. That's a failure of their system, not our system, their system. And so we need to point that out to them. They won't like it, but they need to be told. We have to tell them. Because if we don't tell them and we let it go on and go cam, in the future, our great-grandchildren are not going to know the true history. So we need to do that. We ourselves need to do that.